And now we go to the last part of this lecture video series on the parts of the cell. We will now be discussing your mitochondria and your chloroplasts. Okay? So these two organelles are actually your energy factories. These organelles are the sites where energy is being produced. Okay? So in the case of your mitochondrion, okay, it's called as the powerhouse of the cell. And I don't want you to remember that, of course, no? The typical powerhouse of the cell title. What I want you to remember about mitochondrion is the way how it produces energy. Okay? Let it be known to everyone that ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the energy molecule that we have which corresponds to energy. No? It's like currencies that we use, no? Peso to dollar. So if you have a higher value of peso, you have a power for the dollar, right? In the case of your ATP, if you have a higher amount of ATP molecules, then that would mean that you have higher source of energy or higher amounts of energy that you can use to actually make up this cell and at the same time move as a human being or perform your functions as a human being. So in the case of your mitochondrion, as you can see on the right side, how would you compare its structure compared to the other parts, no, or relative to the other cell parts, no? So how would you compare a mitochondrion with, for example, the endoplasmic reticulum or your Golgi bodies? Okay, so try to describe the structure here on the right, on the model on the right. Okay, so that's your mitochondrion, and according to the class I had in the previous colloquium with 6 sections at Sapientia just yesterday, they mentioned that there is this hot dog outside and there's an isaw inside. No? So that's how they described, okay, what they saw. And I find that interesting because that's a good way to actually describe, no, the things that you see, no? So in that case, okay, so that's right. You have a double membrane structure which is not present in the endomembrane system. So basically, mitochondria has two membranes. Okay? There's an outer membrane and an inner membrane inside. Now, as you can see in the inner membrane, that isaw-like figure, okay, has a rough surface area. So that would mean it has a wider surface area compared to the outer membrane. Right? And if you're going to look at it even further, you'll see that there are protein pumps along this section, no, inside your inner membrane. Okay, so in these protein pumps that are embedded in this inner membrane, they function to make ATP. Okay, just imagine if you have hot dog outside and another hot dog inside, that would mean less surface area. So less proton pumps, and that would mean that you can make only less ATP molecules. Okay? So that's why the mitochondria is designed to be like that. No, the isaw figure inside is called your cristae. CRISTAE. And the longer cristae you have, okay, the more opportunity for you to make a lot of energy molecules in the form of ATP. So I hope that's clear with you, no? Why does the mitochondrion have long cristae again? Okay? To maximize the surface area for the production of ATP. So if it has shorter cristae, then there will be less opportunity, less energy. Of course, the mitochondrion will function to give you the energy you need to move, to grow, and so on. Right? So, in a society, where do you find the role of the nucleus, lysosomes, and the vacuole? No, this kind of question, I think, will help you to actually make analogies of these structures found inside the cell with the things that are happening on society, because these things in the cell are not something you can actually look at in your daily life, right? You don't see the lysosomes every day, even the vacuoles, the nucleus, and such. No, you only saw them through the pictures or the models, or even with the microscope. No, I think for some of you, you have seen only the nucleus, but not yet the lysosomes and the vacuole. So, what I want you to do is to relate these structures and their functions with the things that are occurring in the society. So, for example, if we have the mitochondria, is the powerhouse of the cell, no? In a society, this is a power plant, the power plant that provides energy for all its citizens. So, in the case of the mitochondria, no, it breaks down the molecules of sugars so that you can release energies from the bonds that you broke. Okay? So in that case, it's like fuel, right? And fuel works the same in a power plant. So in a coal-fired power plant, you're actually breaking down fuel to release the energy between the bonds on those fuels. And that energy is used to provide electricity, to provide energy for the constituents, no, for all households. So in the case of the cell, what provides that energy is the mitochondria. Okay? Your mitochondria will break down those sugars. These are actually fuels. And from that breaking down, you are releasing energy. And eventually, you are using that to actually move and grow. Okay? Now, I will leave this question to you. How do you find, or where do you find the role of the nucleus, the lysosomes, and the vacuole? So perhaps, if you know that the nucleus is the control center, then you could relate it with something that controls a society. Your lysosomes are actually those organelles that can break down food items. So perhaps they could be the maintenance personnel who would actually throw out worn out stuff, right? And the vacuole could be a big warehouse, right? So a warehouse where you can store your food, or where you can store your nutrients, or and so on and so forth. Okay? I hope that tip will help you in preparing for your exam. And now we go to the chloroplasts. Okay? And where do we find chloroplasts? Okay? So your chloroplasts are found only in plants, no, and in algae. Okay, algae are the group of organisms that are not considered plants but are capable also of photosynthesis. So, the chloroplasts is the site of photosynthesis. Okay, and what's photosynthesis again? It's the way how plants harness the energy from the sun to actually transform air into a sugar molecule. So just imagine carbon dioxide, which is a gas by nature, can actually be transformed into a sugar, which is solid, right? So plants can do that with light energy. So they transform that solar energy to chemical energy in the bonds found within that sugar, okay? And how do you relate chloroplasts in a society? So perhaps you can make an analogy between chloroplasts and a solar panel, right? So these solar panel firms or solar energy firms in the Philippines, these are actually sites where they use the energy from the sun to make our own electricity, right? So that's how plants do that. So they make their own food by harnessing the energy from the sun and getting that air, carbon dioxide, into themselves, okay, to become sugars. So I hope that's clear. So these are the parts of your chloroplasts, but I won't be discussing this. Let's discuss this when we tackle photosynthesis later on. Now, how about the differences between the cell parts of different groups of organisms? So, for example, in the case of plants and animals, how do they differ from one another? Okay, I hope that you have already the answer to this question, no? Because you had your experience already with the lab. I hope that by that time, you were able to compare the structural differences between animal cells and plant cells. For example, in the case of your cheek cells and the onion skin cells that you discovered or you observed under the microscope. Okay? So, here are what will set plant cells apart from animal cells. The first thing is the chloroplasts. I think you have seen that on fresh leaf samples or even under the tomato cell. So the chloroplasts are those structures that will give you your green pigments in plants. Okay, and again, these are the sites of photosynthesis, and they convert that solar energy to chemical energy. And aside from that, we also have your central vacuole and your cell wall. So the cell wall is different from your cell membrane. Okay, your cell membrane is made up of lipids. These are phospholipids. But your cell wall is made up of sugars, which we call cellulose. Okay, and they provide mechanical support for the plant. Just imagine if humans and animals are made up of cell walls. What could happen? Can we move? Okay, of course not. So, the rigid structure of your plants is due to the presence of the cell wall. This makes them sessile, or let's say they cannot move. So, that's it, no, for the cell wall. At the same time, that will keep the mechanical support of your plant so that it can stay erected. Okay? And at the same time, we also have your central vacuole, which also has a role to play when it comes to the mechanical support of your cell walls. But we will be discussing that in our future lectures. So your central vacuole will store that big amount of fluid to keep your cell erected. And again, this is only found in plants. What's in your animal cells would be food vacuoles that are often temporary. But the central vacuole is permanent. So as you can see here, you have a big space, no, inside your cell for your central vacuole. So a large amount of space is taken up by the central vacuole. And then we have your green pigments that are stored in your chloroplasts, and all of them are surrounded by your cell wall. So these three parts of the cell are actually only found on plants, but not in animals. Okay, so I hope that makes us clear about the differences between the two big groups of organisms. Okay, and then finally, we have to explain the endosymbiotic theory as the origin of mitochondria and chloroplasts. So I remember when I taught this lesson in my previous colloquium last Thursday with the 6 sections of Gen Bio 1, they actually described the mitochondria as a germ. It looks like a bacterium. So that's according to them. And in fact, they are right about that. They are actually former bacteria. But I will explain you a story on how did that happen. So, let's recall, where can DNA be only found in the cell? Okay? DNA is found stored in your nucleus, right? So, but aside from that, no, in our cells, we can also find DNA in our own mitochondria. Okay, in the case of humans, we also have DNA inside our mitochondria. Okay, at the same time, you can also see DNA in the chloroplasts, but you don't have them. Okay, what organisms have chloroplasts? So they are the plants. Okay, yeah. So these mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own unique DNA, which is actually different from the DNA inside the nucleus. Okay? Take note, not all of the DNA are found in the nucleus. Okay? They can also be found in your mitochondria and chloroplasts because all these two are actually ancient bacteria. So there's a part of you that is actually made up of DNA of bacteria. Okay? Now, these two organisms are actually hypothesized to be products of endosymbiosis. And now, let me tell you a story. Okay, I remember my class yesterday that the PowerPoint did not appear already on the screen. So that's why I need to tell them a story so that they can, they can actually get the concepts on endosymbiosis right away. So let me try to do it here as well, no? Say for example, we have two individuals and let's give them names. Okay, so maybe we can use the name John and Micah. Okay, so let's make use of John and Micah. Um, Say for example, John is actually a big cell. Okay, so John is a proto-eukaryote. Okay, and a proto-eukaryote is an ancient cell. So let's say that happened around 1 billion or say 2 billion years ago. So let's assume that you have John 2 billion years ago. And then he met this strange bacterium whose name is Micah. Okay? And usually, the usual thing about cells is that they have to eat so they can live, right? So they have to feed on one another, and then once you ingested it, okay, you're fine, you'll survive, right? Now, John attempted to feed on Micah. So he tried to ingest Micah, but eventually, he stopped digesting Micah. He feels that there's something special about her. And Micah, surprisingly, has this special talent, no? Of making many levels of energy with the use of oxygen. Okay? So Micah is actually an aerobic bacteria, which makes a lot of energy with the use of oxygen. So, John was amazed by this special talent, and instead of digesting her, no, he uses her. Ginamit siya. Okay? Kasi natuwa doon sa energy. So, John was really happy about the energy that Micah provides. But at the same time, no, Micah cannot move. So, she has to realize what's going on. Am I being used? No? So, Micah could feel offended, but he found a special place in John's system. She is actually protected. So in this case, they are actually benefiting from one another. No? John benefits from the energy that Micah can give him. At the same time, Micah is feeling safe under the big cellular structure of John. So they enjoy the company of one another until such a time that they cannot lose one another. So that's why Micah became part of John. And that Micah will be the future mitochondrion. Okay, so that's the story, or that's the love story between the eukaryotes or the cells that have nuclei and the mitochondrion. Okay, so I hope I simplified that story, no, or I simplified this diagram you're seeing on the screen right now with the story I told you. Okay, so let me summarize what happened. So an ancestral eukaryote consumed an aerobic bacterium. In the case of John, he consumed Micah. And actually, as you can see here, aerobic respiration is actually more efficient than other modes of energy production. When you're using oxygen, you're actually producing a lot of energy. And if you have more energy, you have a higher chance to survive, right? So instead of digesting that bacterium, the ancestral eukaryote and bacterium established symbiosis. We have a section called symbiosis, right? And we call symbiosis as the close relationship between two different organisms where they both benefit from one another. Okay? And now, throughout generations, that symbiosis has been maintained until such a time that they became obligate symbionts with each other. When we say obligate symbionts, they cannot lose one another. If the one is gone, the other will be gone as well. So they cannot live without one another. Okay? And by obligate, again, the ancestral eukaryote and the bacterium cannot exist without the other. They are very dependent on each other. Okay? And throughout evolution, it has become integrated in the cell. And that became the future mitochondrion. Okay? And now, we realize that mitochondrion likely came from aerobic bacteria. So the DNA found inside the mitochondrion is actually a former DNA of a former bacteria, right? Meanwhile, chloroplasts also likely come from ancestral photosynthetic bacteria, which we call cyanobacteria. Now, the question is, paano kaya naging magkarelasyon ang cyanobacteria at ang ancestral eukaryote? So, gawan natin ng kwento, Kamarites. I will leave the story up to you. No, I have heard amazing stories about teaching this in the class before. Some of them mentioned that the cyanobacteria is actually the kabit, no, of the big cell, no? So, mitochondrion is the original, but there's another fling, and that's the cyanobacteria. So hopefully you can make your own story on how the cyanobacteria became the future chloroplasts inside your plant cells. Okay? So that ends our lecture, and these are the references which you can read. Okay? And I hope the best for your exam. Okay? Good luck, everyone.